clicking. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of December 20th, 2020. We are going to have an insightful and thought-provoking philosophical and practical conversation today. But first, let me make some introductions of our panel. I am Gennady Stolyarov II, chairman of the US Transhumanist Party. With us, we have our US Transhumanist Party officers, our Director of Applied Innovation, David Shoemaker, our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our Director of Sentient Rights Advocacy, Tom Ross, and soon to join us will be Brent Elman, who is a valued member of the US Transhumanist Party, and Pavel Ilan, who is the Secretary of the US Transhumanist Party. And our special guest today hails from Nigeria. He is a philosopher, a futurist, and a learning coach, Ugochukwu Chukwu, who authored this book, An Exercise in Clear Thinking. And I told Ugochukwu in the conversation prior to the salon that I'm quite fond of the cover design for this book. It is a design of his own creation. So Ugochukwu is a man of many talents, a man of many insights. We're quite pleased to have him on our virtual Enlightenment Salon today. Welcome, Ugochukwu, and please tell us what An Exercise in Clear Thinking is about, what motivated you to write this book, and what value our viewers can derive from the contents therein.
Thank you so much, Gennady, for having me. Thank you so much, the panelists, and thank you, everyone that has just joined us on this amazing conversation. I'm really pleased to be here and also humbled to be part of this salon. First of all, the exercise in clear thinking, it's more than just a book for me. It is something I have really thought through, pondered, and some of the principles that I've been using to guide my life over some time now. So one of the greatest mistakes I think I dread to make is whenever you think that you are actually standing, whenever you think you're actually on the right course, you really have to look very well to find, to make sure that you are not on the wrong course, because many philosophers have said this, many thinkers of history have actually said this. So why is it is really important? Why is this important? Many times we'll find ourselves in positions of power. Many times we find ourselves in positions whereby the kind of decisions we make will have generational consequences, or not just what is happening now, but in 50, 100, and even 500,000 years from now. So some of these decisions, our decisions define us. And if we really do not understand the mechanism that is guiding our decision system, our decisions, if we really do not understand how this works, they can be quite catastrophic. Because frankly, I used to tell people, the people you see in leadership positions that make wrong decisions, it is not actually that they are evil, that within themselves that they have come out and they really want to perpetrate evil. Deep down within themselves, they actually think, they believe, and they want to do good. And they believe that the actions that they are doing in the long run, even if you don't understand it, will turn out to be good. They think they're doing it for the best intentions. But the problem is our neural architecture, our brain has been designed to perform two tasks, to keep us safe and to make sure we survive. And so most times when we go about making decisions for our lives and thinking that we're on the right course, that is just our brain trying to project something for us so that you can follow that path. Whereas in the real sense, these are selfish decisions that could be really catastrophic. So your brain can actually deceive you into thinking that you're on the right course, whereas you're not on the right course. And this is not because our brains are bad, no. Our brains have evolved over the years to save us, to protect us within the wild African savannah. And so now that our environment, our modern environment has drastically changed, a lot of the things that our brain we're designed to help us do are really not necessary or really not helpful now. And so we need to go back, review some of these things, and find out ways that our brains might be undoing us, so that we can put in things in place that can allow us to self-correct, to allow us to save us from ourselves. So the world we live in today is characterized with a lot of abundance. And we can see this, the sheer amount of abundance mostly featured in the amount of information that is in the world today. And on the one hand, the data that is flowing in, the data that our brains are, that our brain is facing, our minds are facing today, weren't as that much 30, 50, 100 years from now, years ago. Our forefathers didn't have to do with the gamut of information that we are facing today. And so several varying estimates and researches have shown that people are now suffering, a lot of people suffer from ADHD because the amount of information that the average mind encounters has grown by over 30% in the last 20 years. So this can really be catastrophic when you are a decision maker, when you are a problem solver. So whatever situation that we find ourselves today, whether you are a leader, a CEO, or a policymaker, all of those things, if you do not understand how to handle your attention mechanism, how to organize your thinking in the right way, how to manage this flow of data, of information, you really are sitting on a keg of compounder, and you really are going to be making decisions that can be really catastrophic for others around you. And why is this even scarier? Why is this even scary at this moment? It's scary because of
Ugochukwu, it seems that you have been muted, but please continue.
Okay, so I was talking about why this is really important more than ever than now. It is scary because of the exponential rates of our technologies, the rates at which they're growing, and the effects that these technologies can have. If you are developing an AI system, a robotic system, if you are investing in biotechnology, let's say you're working in the area of longevity, all of these areas are highly sensitive areas. They are highly sensitive sectors, such that any mistake that you make, even in the minutest extent, even in the smallest instance, can really have catastrophic consequences that might be irreversible. If you make a mistake in, let's say, producing a toy, children's toy, or let's say in making a sofa, if you make a mistake in the design of a sofa, the consequences might not be all that really exponential. They might not be very huge. But if you make a mistake in the development of a rocket, the consequences are very huge, because once it goes off and it blows, you're losing resources, billions of dollars, you're losing human life, and you're losing a lot of trust from the industry. So the consequences of most of the decisions we take today, especially in our technology sector, are really huge. And so it is important that more than ever, it is important that we really deploy, we really learn how to deploy our intelligence in problem solving and in decision making. And that is what the book An Exercise in Clear Thinking is all about. As a leader, you find yourself in a leadership position. The position brings a lot, on the table. And it is important to understand that if you make a mistake, even in the slightest sense, the consequences might be irreversible. You can see some instances, I think it was last week or two, when Google, the server went down. You can imagine, and it came back, I think, also in a couple of minutes or hours or so. At that level, any mistake you make on that level could cause lives. It could cause a lot of lives. It could cause the crashing of the stock market, all of these things. So the problem we are witnessing today is that the same people at this helm of affairs, that's you and I, are the same people that are always on our social media, that are always exposed to the massive amount of data that is coming in. And so it is the same brain that we're using to organize and control all of these things. So if you don't get it right and in learning how to deploy your intelligence, you are going to get it wrong in the field of decision making, in the area of problem solving. So the book Exercise in Clear Thinking, it's really about teaching us, it's really about helping us to learn how to deploy our intelligence in problem solving and in decision making, specifically, especially during these times that we find ourselves. That is what the book is all about. And so I put out a lot of exercises. These exercises, I call them mental frameworks. They're more like principles. The biology of our brain has conditioned us in such a way that there are mistakes that are inbuilt into the very architecture, our cognitive framework, our cognitive architecture. It is inbuilt into our biology systems. And so you cannot really escape some of these things. But what these principles and frameworks allows us to do is to always keep ourselves on the right course, is to always put more like a check that allows you to go back on the feedback, get the feedback and trying to make sure that you are on the right course so that you don't veer off so far off course that it becomes really difficult for you to come back. So learning how to deploy your intelligence in the world and solving the problems that we are faced with today, as as little as the problems are, and as great as the problems are, can really have a lot of effects and can really help in saving your own life. So that is, in a nutshell, what the book An Exercise in Clear Thinking is all about. It is relevant to your work. It is very relevant to your personal life.
Yes, thank you, Ugochukwu, for that introduction. And there is much in the book that we can discuss today. The first chapter in the book uses as the case study the story of the development of the atomic bomb in the United States, where prior to World War II, essentially Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard approached the US government and essentially offered the US government the ability to develop the atomic bomb because they feared that Nazi Germany would develop it first. And as it turned out, they were a bit mistaken in their estimation of the capabilities of Nazi Germany, which ultimately was defeated without recourse to nuclear weapons. But I wanted to hear a bit of a summary, an overview from you, Ugochukwu, about where you think these scientists were mistaken and what you were trying to illustrate with that story, because this is an example of a decision that was made that had irreversible consequences in terms of bringing about these weapons of mass destruction. And it has taken now more than 70 years for the world to try to contain the potential damage that these weapons could cause. In some cases, there have been efforts at limited disarmament, but the threat of nuclear war is still very much with us.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much for that question. I'm going to look at it two from one basic perspective, and then I'll look at two broad effects or two broad ways that they would have looked at the issue. So if you look at each of the chapter, whenever I went through the source stories, after I would talk about the mental frameworks and some of the lessons that could be gleaned from that particular chapter. And so at the end of the chapter, that's the chapter 1 of the book, I talked about some of the things I think that some of the scientists would have really engaged themselves in to prevent them or to allow them to get a broader perspective of the problem or the issue at hand before they took their decision, before they made their decision. And I talked about running scenario analysis. And you understand that scenario analysis allows you to look at all the possible, the probable possibilities within a situation, and that you have in hand, so that you can really have, to a very large extent, sufficient information for you to make decisions. And I don't know the consequences. I don't know the circumstances that were at hand before the scientists made their decision. But one thing is clear in these things. As a scientist, you understand the technology behind the science that you're proposing. You understand the effects of the science that you're proposing. If you really want to solve a problem, if you really want to dictate the level of a problem or the level of an issue that is at hand, the best way, sometimes we think that we cannot really know the whole picture. We cannot really see the whole picture. And that is because we are looking to see a big picture before we can make a decision. And most times, life does not present us with the big picture. We are unable to see the big picture from where we are standing, because the future is still in, the future hasn't yet come. And the future is simply an accumulation of the present decisions that we make and the present activities that we undertake now. But the best way, one of the best ways I think you can look at a problem and profile a solution to it, or even extrapolate or make a projection as to how the effects will look at, is to look at the simple effects, the simple things about that problem. So if you want to project how dangerous an atomic weapon can be, look at its effects in the lab. If you want to put it on if you're in the lab and you run a scenario analysis of the effects of this, look at the surge of energy, look at the simple effects that are coming from the scenario analysis that you're running. And then from there, you can deduce how catastrophic this can be when it is maximized. A good example I usually make is this. There's what is called residual data that usually comes from the data that we give off when we go to social media, when we upload posts. And it is said that in the book, Surveillance Capitalism, the writer of the book talked about how important residual data can really be in identifying the real things about you, the core of your personality. And apart from this residual data, in other instances, we have seen that if you can track the little information about the most simple things about anything, you can extrapolate about the huge consequences that could come from that. And so the residual data coming from the posts that you make on social media speak a lot. They are more like a window to the soul of your personality, which is a more gigantic thing that you really cannot grasp if you're looking at it as a whole. And so if you look at the residual data that is coming from any information, any scenario analysis that you're running, and you use predictive analysis, you can predict what can happen in the next 10 days, 10 years, or 50 years from now. Now, it could be argued that during that period that they hadn't this level of information and this level of technology to really make that decision, to really come to that point that they can really run a scenario analysis that is sufficient enough that will allow them to come to that kind of effective conclusion. But the point, like I told you before we started, the point that the book is trying to make is not to really put a final judgment on the scientist, on Albert Einstein or Leo Szilard, about what they should or should have done, or their mistakes. It's not to pass a judgment on them, but it's to use their mistakes to teach us that now that we have the capabilities to run this kind of scenario analysis, to really understand the full ramifications from the simple data, from the simple information that we are getting from what we are doing, now that we have the capability to run that, we shouldn't ignore it, because we can see the exponential effects that they can have when we do not make those decisions. Unlike in the past, the effects of a mistake about a technology or a decision that you make as a leader could take years for it to manifest. But now It could be sudden and catastrophic and almost irreversible. So that is why it is even more important that we pay close attention to some of these things. So again, the whole point of the chapter wasn't to pass a judgment on the scientist, but to draw a lesson for us that now that we have this urgency, that we have even a greater urgency to pay more attention than they even did because of the kind of situation and the kind of capabilities that are inherent in our technologies.
Yes, thank you for your response. Now, one of the key ideas that you bring forth in the book is the concept of sufficient intelligence when making decisions. Could you please elaborate upon that and perhaps using this example of the development of the atomic bomb, what do you think the appropriate deployment of sufficient intelligence would have resulted in the minds of those scientists, and could it have prevented a situation where the United States actually deployed an atomic bomb by the end of World War II?
Okay. Okay. So quickly about sufficient intelligence. Every problem that you are faced with in the world has a certain level of factors. There are factors and components of that problem. There are elements that compose that problem. And to really understand that problem, you really have to factor in all of these factors. Sufficient intelligence. I usually tell people that the only thing that you need to survive in the world is simply intelligence. As a matter of fact, it is sufficient intelligence. And when I say this, people say, what about other capabilities that human beings have? And what about, you cannot really say that being smart or bright would solve all of your problems. But what I say to that is, if you really understand what intelligence is and how it is deployed, you understand that every capability that you've got, every ability that you've got is an intelligence. And if you look at all the species, all the different species in the world, the bird has wings and other capabilities. Those are its intelligence. The elephant has its weights to throw around, and that's its intelligence. The human being has the mind, and that's the greatest capacity that it has, and that is where its intelligence lies. Now, if you understand how intelligence works, I define intelligence as the ability to take in information from the world, interpret the data that is coming from the world accurately, and to do it fast enough to ensure your survival and your thriving and your growth. These are the two most important things that your brain is taxed to do, to make sure that you survive and that you grow, that you pass on your genes to the next species. And then every problem that you're faced with in the world has a certain level of elements that compose it. For you to really solve that problem, you would require a commensurate level of intelligence, a commensurate level of capabilities, a commensurate level of data, information that can be built into a body of knowledge that you can deploy to really solve that problem. And so to really get at sufficient intelligence, three things are really important. The first thing is enough information, enough data that can be built into a body of knowledge on a particular subject. And so that will help you to do what I call problem characterization. To do problem characterization is to be able to identify and define a map of the components, get a map of the components of a problem. So once you are able to do that, you've gotten the first stage. The second stage and the second thing is about getting the ability of leveraging minds. On your own, you might not be able to have all of the capabilities that are really needed to solve a problem. So you really have to leverage a lot of minds in solving a particular problem. So what some companies and institutions do today is they form some kind of what is called a pizza team. A pizza team is where you get people from different sectors, people from different industries come together with different expertise who are really good at different in their own different expertise to come together to profile and brainstorm on a particular problem. So you are bringing engineers, you are bringing philosophers, you're bringing scientists, you're bringing policymakers, people from different sectors, diverse sectors, to really work on the problem. So what that does is it helps us in doing what is called systems thinking. Systems thinking allows you to look at the broader spectrum of everything that is involved in confronting a problem. So you, in this case, you're leveraging on minds, you're leveraging minds, and you're leveraging capabilities, and you're bringing all of them together in consonance with the information that you've done, that you've got, to really put all of these things together to prefer a solution. And then the third and the final thing I talk about is a sufficient understanding of the components of the problem. And here I call it the problem simulation. So you really have to get a problem simulation. So a problem simulation allows you to understand the physics of a need. Every problem that you want to solve is an answer to a need, a void in the society. So in the case of the atomic bomb, there was a need to end the war. That was what Leo Szilard and Albert Einstein really wanted within themselves. Albert Einstein was actually a pacifist. If you look at it, he wasn't a violent man, so to speak. But he looked at the situation that he had at hand, and he thought that when Szilard proposed the option that even if the United States did not deploy the atomic bomb, did not go ahead in developing the atomic bomb, that Germany would still go ahead and develop it. But they didn't ask enough questions as to what are other instances that could happen. What if Germany didn't have that capability? How can we really determine that Germany has these capabilities? Is the atomic bomb the only answer we have to ending this war? So Leo Szilard was doing a couple of researches on the atomic bomb and also everything about the atomic energy. And during that period, he had a piece of technology in his hand that he thought was very powerful, and that he thought was going to be the answer to a lot of questions. And so his mind was now cocooned into having that as the be it, save it all for any problem. So he was still thinking in the terms of war, in the terms of who has the greater weapons out there, who has the greater capability out there when it comes to the weapons of mass destruction, when it comes to army and all of that. So they didn't really think outside of the box. And we can trace these. And if you look at these three components that I laid out that make up that will help someone to really come to the point of sufficient intelligence. That is the ability to leverage minds, the ability to get enough information and knowledge, and the ability to simulate the problem. If they really went through all of these three phases, I'm sure that if they had, for example, a Pixar team that was composed of people, both scientists and non-scientists, they would have thought of other options outside of developing an atomic bomb, outside of developing the technology. There will always be a way. That's the point. There will always be a better way to solving that problem. Finally, what I will say is this. In solving a problem, in getting to the conclusion of a problem, I usually tell people this. The best solution to a problem is the most simple solution to that problem, not the most complicated. If you really want to know if you have come to the sufficiency, if you've gotten a sufficient solution to a problem, which I believe, once you get to the sufficiency of a problem, once you get a sufficient solution to a problem, that solution will automatically be sufficiently useful to life, as I said in the first rule. And the value should be seen as anything that is sufficiently useful to life. And for you to determine that, you have to determine that with the sufficiency of the solution that you're proffering. And the best way to determine the sufficiency of the solution that you're proffering is when it is very simple. A practical example is this. Look at the human body. Look at the way you breathe. Look at the anatomical structure of your body. The delivery system of blood circulation within your body is so simple and fast that it is very less complicated in proffering solutions. You see, The way you breathe, breathing is so effortless that it is not complicated in any sense. So if you're developing a technology out there, if you are developing a solution to a problem out there, look at the simplicity of that solution. One of the ways, one of the markers that will really help you to know whether you've gotten to the point that this problem is sufficiently useful is a sufficient solution that will be sufficiently useful to life, is to look at the simplicity of that problem. And I think having a bomb that has the capacity to clear almost the whole city is not the simplest solution to a world war, to a war that is ravaging, already killing millions of people. So I think if they have thought in these lines and in these terms, they would have come to a better decision making and a solution to the problem. But again, as I said, it's not a judgment on them, because some of the literatures that we have today, we have the privilege of learning their lessons in order to come to these decisions today. They mightn't have they might not have had that privilege in order with the privilege in the sense of the technology and also in the sense of thinking in these terms, in these issues. They might not have had that privilege, but we do have it today. And so we do not have any excuse to make decisions, to make catastrophic decisions that might be irreversible when it comes to the solutions that we're proffering today.
Yes, thank you, Ugochukwu. That was an excellent response, quite insightful, and it has stimulated some comments from the chat. Daniel Twet says, properly defining a problem gets you most of the way to the solution. And you were speaking about that a bit. John H. mentions the principle of Occam's Razor, essentially to avoid unnecessary complexity, unnecessary multiplication of entities. If a simpler explanation or a simpler solution in this case will do. And it's interesting, Jason Geringer states, I wouldn't use the human body as an example of something that is, quote, simple, referring to the extensive biological complexity of the body. Super Fin Guy responds that for what it does, the human body is pretty simple, actually. So he's considering more of the level of complexity as contrasted with the purpose of the organism. So it's interesting to consider something that Albert Einstein, interestingly enough, pointed out, that a solution or an explanation should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. And I think the challenge in the contemporary world is how we strike the proper balance there between essentially sufficient intelligence and a sufficient appreciation of the complexity of a situation, and yet not overthinking it, not overcomplicating it, not becoming mired in what some people would call analysis paralysis, which is often a situation faced by a lot of contemporary institutions and bureaucracies, especially in the Western world, where there are sometimes so many special interests, for instance, who are trying to influence a particular decision, and each has their own point of view, each has their own set of considerations to inject into the mix. And yet there are times when doing something is better than doing nothing at all, when it's the status quo that poses the greatest risk. Sometimes it could even be a risk on a massive scale, like COVID-19 poses, where thousands of people are dying every single day. And yet, despite efforts to accelerate vaccine development and approval, it still took 11 months in the United States from the time that a viable vaccine candidate was developed to the time that it actually began fairly slowly to be distributed to the general population. So where does one strike the proper balance, especially in an era which, as you pointed out, is dominated by social media, where a lot more information comes at a person than used to be the case, and where sometimes there's a lot of pressure, especially from social media, to be immediately responsive and reactive instead of being proactive and integrating all of this information and figuring out the best decision through one's own clear thinking as opposed to reaction to the immediate stimuli that one faces.
Okay, interesting question there. I think uh, I had a conversation with Rebecca Costa, and she talks in her book On the Verge, and the second, her first book, The Watchman's Rattle. So in that conversation, we were really exploring some of the ramifications of the problems, the level of problem that we have today. And so if you look at some of the ideas she read out in her book, she said, in the past, if you look at some of the past society, some of the past empires and successful society in the world, like the Mayan Empire, the Roman Empire, they were really successful in solving their problems because they thought in rational terms. They did not substitute science, facts for beliefs. And so when they were confronted with some of these problems, they deployed facts, they deployed logic, and they were able to come to a very veritable solution to some of the problems that they are faced with. But at the point, they started they started substituting beliefs for facts. Their societies started failing, and they started witnessing a lot of problems. So a very basic case was the Mayan society. When they had the problem of drought, they started sacrificing people as against finding logical solutions to that, rational solutions to that. And so because of the cognitive overload, the thing there is our biology has evolved to solve to manage a certain amount of data influx. But the problem we have today is that the flow of information has become so much that our brains, the cognitive capacity of our brains cannot really make sense of this amount of information. And so we enter what is called, a cognitive impasse, a cognitive overload, so that we enter a paralysis of thinking because the amount of information is so much. But to really get to the point, and that's the whole essence of this book, giving us tools and principles to help us think through these issues in a much simpler way. There are some of the rules that I laid out here. A good example is the VET principles, the value efficiency demonstration that I talked about. Looking at a problem, and you look at every situation that you've got has, of all the information that you have that is coming to you, 20% of them is actually providing the 80% of the output. And this is basically a simple thing that comes from the Pareto principle, the Pareto principle by Viverdo Pareto. And so if you consider that, if you look at that, and if you understood that 20% of the information that you've had is going to give you 80% of the result that you need, then you have to put in place structures that will allow you to harness that 20. A good example is that. So another thing is the Parkinson's law. The Parkinson's law allows you to be very quick in making decisions, to have a bias towards action, to give yourself short deadlines to allow you to come to a veritable decision. The reason for that is whenever you find yourself in a difficult situation and you have to make a very drastic decision, if you have a bias towards action, if you have a short timeline for you to make that decision, what happens is that your brain usually compresses and gets to the point that it tries as much as possible to leave off all the unnecessary elements and focus on the essentials. This is how the brain is designed. You really want to, if you are faced with running away from an impending lion that is coming to eat you and climbing a tree, within a short amount of time, you really have to make a split decision very quick. So you are very efficient. You are you're likely to be very efficient in your thinking when you are faced with that kind of situation, when you give yourself that kind of short deadline, than when you are given a whole lot of time to think through the problem. And I think that was what happened in the case of COVID-19. Let us not shoot ourselves on the foot, and let us not overthink some of these issues. Let's face it, in the past, it took over 4 years, approximately 5 years or 3 years for us to develop vaccines. The Spanish influenza, all of those problems, it took us a whole lot of years, a whole lot of time to really come to that conclusion, to get a vaccine out there. But if you compared what we did, what we achieved with our technologies today, with the current pandemic, and what we have been doing in the past, you would record that as a success. Now, some people might argue against that and say the capacity of our technology today allows us to, should allow us to come to a better solution much quicker and much faster, instead of losing all that amount of life and resources out there. But the thing there is, in some cases, you cannot really know how fast you can go until you challenge yourself to go. And so one of the rules in the book is to have a bias towards action. Having a bias towards action allows you to be very quick in response, but at the same time, you have to be able to know how to deduce information, to deduce data. But the real thing here is our technologies have allowed us, has every problem we have today, I dare to argue that every problem we have today, there is a technological solution for it. It's just that we have not come to, it's just that we are suffering from a lot of doubt, unbelief. We are substituting facts for beliefs so much that we now refuse to think in terms of science. We now refuse to believe the scientific facts. We now really refuse to look at the data and to really analyze them. Predictive analytics is there. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of these technologies give us the capacity to really come to the solutions as quick as possible. Most of the solutions, some of the problems that we have today. And I usually tell people that if you are faced with a problem and you are able to give a better definition to that problem, you give a sufficient definition that really explains and characterizes, that really explains and gives a sufficient solution to that problem, the technology to develop the solution to that problem is within that problem. A good example is this. If you look at all the technologies that we've developed, AI, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, the phones, the rockets, all of those things, where did we get the raw material to develop those technologies? Here on Earth. We didn't import them. Were those technologies available 40,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago? No, they weren't available. But are they available today? Yes. Where did those technologies come from? They came from the Earth. We still source the resources from the earth. So the problem wasn't about the technology as it is about the thinking, as it is about the definition of the problem. So once you could define the problem accurately, once you could define it and get to a sufficient solution, automatically the technology is actually available waiting for you. And the technology, you can really harness it from the resources that are around you. So if I used to tell people when I handle some sessions with people, I say, instead of investing a lot of cash trying to develop technology, invest a lot of problem trying to define the problem. Invest a lot of money, invest a lot of resources trying to define the problem. Once you can define the problem, it's amazing how simplistic some of the solutions that you can profile can really be to the solution. So it is not about the sophistication of the solution or the sophistication of the technology, as it is about the simplicity of the thinking and the simplicity of the solutions. And that is what the exercise in clear thinking is all about here.
Yes, thank you, Ugochukwu. And a lot of your comments resonate with some key principles in transhumanism. For instance, you mentioned the bias toward action, and that corresponds to the proactionary principle, the idea that instead of the precautionary principle, instead of avoiding doing anything until you're absolutely sure of all of the effects, you rationally weigh the potential benefits and the potential costs, and you consider the risks of both action and inaction, and you try to formulate a course of action that strives to maximize the benefits and minimize the costs to the extent possible, but you don't also subject yourself to the risks of doing nothing, the risks of the status quo, which are also very much present. And also, it's interesting that you pointed out, essentially all of the problems facing humankind today have technological solutions, but a lot of people have cognitive blocks that prevent them from actualizing the potential of these technologies or developing technologies to the extent that would actually solve those problems. And we have witnessed those obstacles as well, being transhumanists trying to reach out to the general public with these ideas. I think there are two main types of obstacles. One is the status quo bias that prevents people from seeing the possibilities that even are available in the near future. And the second is sheer unawareness. That is, a lot of people haven't gotten to that realization that many of these problems are solvable. A lot of people just seem to think, well, this is the way the world is, and they try to adapt to it. They don't give up on life. They live on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes they can even put forward extraordinary efforts, but they're missing some very powerful possibilities. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts as to why you think those obstacles exist, and what are some effective ways to overcome them on a society-wide scale or a global scale.
Okay, thank you so much. Um, Part of the problems that we face come, especially when it comes to thinking through problems like these on global scale, that has a massive amount of the consequences, is because of our biological system, the way our brain has evolved and the way our brain is designed. So I've mentioned that our brain is designed in such a way that it allows us to maximize a certain amount of information in order to stay safe and in order to survive. Another problem that our cognitive capacity, our brain architecture deals with is really about long-term thinking, because some of the problems, like in transhumanism, some of the issues that are being talked about in transhumanism is they are problems that people view that are problems that are far off in the future, that requires a lot of long-term thinking, and our brain is not designed to do long-term thinking. Practically, our brain is designed to handle the most immediate problems that you're faced with. How do you survive? How do you have food to eat now? How do you get something over your head? How do you get a shelter over your head now? What are the most what is the most urgent problem that we need to face now? And so you see that approach. It was really deployed during the coronavirus lockdowns. You see a lot of countries and policymakers, we are doing a lot of quick fix, reacting to what is happening now. Companies were laying off staff. That was very much reactionary. And so in most cases, it appears that it's almost difficult, that we cannot really help ourselves in coming to that point whereby we are able to think long term, and we are able to handle our decision making to suit long term thinking. And one of the best ways I usually tell people to help in solving this is to run scenario analysis. Run a scenario analysis and show people the possibilities, how that your inability or your inaction for the problems that might appear to be coming 10, 50, or 40 years from now could have potential damage even in the present. If you run those scenario analysis, they will allow you to see the downsides, the potential downside of the problems that you're faced with, and to really understand the ramifications of some of these problems. So because our brains has evolved not to pay attention to long-term thinking. And so to really get people to focus long-term whilst also focus on short-term, that's that requires amount of a sheer cognitive effort to really do that. And I tell people the test of a sufficiently intelligent mind is the ability to hold several opposing ideas in the mind and be able to effectively deploy them effect, effectively in problem solving. That's the ability of a sufficiently intelligent mind to hold several opposing ideas. And we are not designed to do this. It's very difficult for us to do this. To believe that, to think like a Republican, to see the point of view of a Republican as well as a Democrat, to think, to see the perspective of a religious as well as a secularist, to think like a capitalist as well as a socialist, to see all of those, to carry these ideas at the same time in the mind, to think short term as well as long term, to have hairy or audacious goals, as well as engage in evolutionary progress. These requires a higher amount of cognitive effort to really do that. So that is the true test of a sufficiently intelligent mind, the ability to hold these opposing ideas in the mind and to effectively deploy them in problem solving. And one of the ways that I advise people to really look at this issue and to make it easier for them is to try not to think in the terms of either or. Either it is this or it is that. Either we solve the problem, the climate problem, or we focus on the economy. Either we focus on growth or we love up the climate problem. Either we solve the coronavirus pandemic, either we lock down or the economy suffers, or we don't lock down and the economy suffers. Once you start thinking in that either or terms, you block off all the possibilities that can really come to view for you to think through and then come with a better solution. But once you start thinking in what I call in both and terms, how can I preserve the economy now and in the future and still preserve people's health? That requires what I call intellectual creativity. That is you now deploying intellectual creativity to really flex around and look at all the options that possibly could be on the table. Because the fact is this, the reality out there it has nothing on its own. It is plain, it is neutral, subject to the interpretation that you give to it. So sometimes we think that we have only two options. No, when people tell you we have only two options, tell them no, we can have more. Why don't we have more options? So once you start thinking in these and on both terms, it gives you the ability to really think through all of these problems and find a way to come to a lasting solution to some of these issues.
Yes, those are wonderful comments, Ugochukwu, and I completely agree. It's important to reject this kind of binary dichotomous thinking that so many people fall into, and it explains a lot of the political and ideological polarization in our era when a lot of people simply haven't considered what others from opposing perspectives actually think and value. Instead, they think in terms of straw men or caricatures, and they attribute these nefarious motives to people who differ from them, when in reality, there could be differences in perceptions of facts or differences in how people believe it is best to implement fairly similar fundamental values to the other side. And I also think your comments are essential for anybody who wants to be an effective diplomat and who seeks to get into the minds of other people, understand what they're thinking, how they make their decisions, so that a proposal that is put forward could potentially be accepted or at least seen as tolerable by multiple sides. And that can go a long way toward resolving conflicts and ensuring social cooperation. So great comments there, Ugochukwu. Now I think it's a good time to go around the US Transhumanist Party panel and see if anyone has questions for Ugochukwu. Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, yeah, just a lot of good stuff there. A lot to pull apart, and there's nothing that I don't agree with. When you touch on the idea of our biological architecture and what has gotten us to this point, and I think that's the issue, is that there's a relatively short period of time between the cave and the condo. You know, we have still the same brain architecture and these survival traits, and they're kind of on autopilot now. But the reality is, we are now taking our babies to see the lions. So these were very useful traits. Fear is a very useful trait, but it's over serving us now. And so I think a lot of these things are a result of that architecture. We tend to categorize people, or we get tribal, or we see things as a threat first. Our brains are designed to seek patterns, and because we needed to be able to identify a lion from a beige field of grass, and now we're using that trait to weave conspiracy theories. So I think it's a very important thing to realize and to step back. There is a real value to this qualia that we've developed, where we can really take in so much enough information to really assess a situation. And I think we should be focusing more on that. I talk a lot about, my work is all about alleviating the fear of AI, because it is a great tool, but our primal instinct is to see it as a threat, because we realize we're no longer on the top of the intellectual food chain, and that worries a lot of people. And there's a lot of reason to be concerned, but there's actually, I think, a real need to focus more on the better parts of the qualia that we've developed, and seeking out problems, and then learning how to convey those problems to an AI, for instance. But it's just a really great subject, and there's so many good points made that I think are very important. I think your example of the Manhattan Project. Now, granted, there was a time they were racing against time to get this thing built, and they also didn't know whether there would be a chain reaction that would light the whole atmosphere on fire. So in a way, their curiosity was the real danger there. But it's interesting to think about that we are really at our best when we're making instant decisions. Like having to run from a lion, or this type of thing that we've really developed, and that we're really best when we're kind of not overthinking a thing. And so it's just a great conversation and a very interesting book. Very important right now.
Yeah. I think that's great. The points you touched upon, and about us having the ability, because of our brain architecture, because of our brain architecture, and how some of the useful traits that we had in the past have now become some of our undoing today. I think one of it being fear. I think one of the ways I touched upon it on the book is to try to think of these some of these traits that we have that are now working against us, to look at these, how are they working against us, and how can we actually leverage them? Because it's not about what is out there, it's about your interpretation about it. You see, so if some of your traits are working against you, it means that you are using them in a certain way that they are now working against you. If you could redeploy them in the best ways, and so have a better analysis of the situation, so that you can accurately deploy it, so that you can accurately deploy that instinct or that trait to the problem that you're faced with, it will give you the best results. So the problem is not really about the trait, as it is about your understanding and your deployment of that trait. So it means that we are not properly deploying our intelligence. And so that is where the exercise in clear thinking comes in. It helps you to know how to deploy your intelligence in the world, as in a way that it will serve you better. So that is what it's all about. So if you are deploying the trait of fear, I talked about it in the book, that you can look at fear from three ways. You can confront your fear, you can embrace your fear, and you can actually leverage your fear. So if your fear appears in a way that it scares you, you can actually confront it by being aggressive, by being more like attacking the source of the fear. By attacking the source of the fear, you find out a lot of things about it. Another example is to embrace the fear. Embracing the fear is a more like a slow approach. where you try to understand the ramifications and what is involved in the fear. So you're not being very assertive. You're being passive in this sense. You're not being very active. You're being passive about this, the problem that you're faced with. And so that helps you to really make sense of what is happening, of the components of that issue, and then it will put you in a better situation for you to now leverage that fear to confront the problem and to come with a better solution. So a good example is public speaking. If you're afraid of public speaking, I think it's a very good, uh, 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 it gives you an advantage of trying to learn how to speak in public. So if you, in order to overcome that fear, if you now enter into into trying to learn about public speaking, you are now embracing it. And so you are learning, as you keep learning it, your fears start to disperse, because fear is really about knowledge, is really about awareness, is really about your ability to understand a situation. What you fear is what you do not understand. If you really understand something, your fear will go away, because fear is just about cognitive illusion. So if once you don't understand the situation, fear trips in, because the brain does not like unknown things. It likes to predict reality. It likes to or find itself in a situation where it can predict the next outcome. So once it cannot predict the next outcome, it enters into this cognitive state whereby it freezes. It freezes. So once it freezes, it cannot make any decision in that sense. So fear trips in. Your blood releases your blood your brain releases neurotransmitters like cortisol and all of that puts you in a stress mode so that you can come to a better decision. So, but once you start studying the source of your fear, once you start trying to understand and leverage it, embrace it, try to confront it, it becomes clearly, it begins to clarify itself, and you begin to really understand it better and better. So instead of looking at our traits as the problem, I think we should look at more ways that we can leverage our traits in solving the problems that we face today.
Yeah, I think that's a real problem right now, because we do have all these algorithms that are dividing people. You get into a loop of your interests, and it connects you with other people. So I really think that we need a moonshot. We need a project where we introduce algorithms that introduce nuance and allow us to see what the other people in the other bubble are doing. Because you're right, that's exactly it. The more you do it. Years ago, I took a public speaking course. Um, and all you did every week was get up and talk for 5 minutes, and just doing it over and over and over. Before long you couldn't shut me up. So that's the key. But the idea is, how do we make this part of the culture? I think first of all, it's starting with the internet, starting with social media, and getting algorithms out there that really do introduce you to what opposing ideas are. So we stop pigeonholing people, and we start using caricatures and stereotypes of the other. So it's very important stuff.
Yes,
Yeah,
indeed.
it's really interesting. You talked about leveraging our technology and our algorithms to come to better solutions to these. One of the ways I think we can do this, I've been working on a project for some time now. It's called virtual learning. So the essence of the virtual learning is to really help people to learn how to learn fast using technology to do that, to help us to do that. And I believe one of the best ways to do that is to leverage our VR, virtual reality. If you really want somebody to come to a full understanding of a situation, like we talked about scenario analysis, if you put that person in a virtual reality space, where let's say you're talking about the effects of climate change, someone has not really come to terms with what it takes, the effects of climate change, and then you build a scenario analysis of what it will look like if the climate actually collapses, of the catastrophic consequences of what is happening and how it is actually affecting our world. And you put that person in that space, and then the person can really have an audio visual and immersive experience of what is happening. It will go down to the cellular level of that person, at the genetic level, and change that person, in the sense that, because once your brain releases neurochemicals, they go down to your cells and they change it. And that is where change comes in. for you to learn quickly, you need to change at your molecular, at the cellular level.
Yeah,
So
that
once you put yourself in that situation, when you put that person in that situation, we're looking at how to build that kind of a situation so people can really get the full immersive experience of what it looks like. And so once we're able to arrive at that, to change the person's whole experience about that situation. So I think the technology can really help us in that instance. A good example is also if you want someone to learn quickly about let's say, a language, to have experience. Let's say you're having, and you had an experience in the past about, or you're a doctor and you worked as a coronavirus health worker during the pandemic, and you saw the whole gruesome experience, how people suffered, and how all of those things happened. Those experiences change you as a cellular level. They change you at a cellular level. If you wanted to transmit that experience to another person, it will be difficult when you're trying to explain it. Let's say we enter into a room that we have to negotiate, that we have to talk through making policies, and you're trying to explain to people what you saw on the battlefield. It's going to be really difficult to get people to understand that. But if you put that person in a virtual reality environment whereby your emotions could be translated into emotional language, and that person can really get that feeling, the person can get the source of that feeling on his own body, I think it can help that person in making those kind of decisions quickly, and in order to get into that space to really understand what it was like for you, you know,
absolutely that
our,
heuristic
our yeah,
experience.
our biology helped us in doing that to some extent. When you talk about mirror neurons are what allows us to feel empathetic about others. So when someone is in a situation, and then the person is explaining to you, you try to imagine yourself in that situation. But the fact now is the realities on board. We cannot really harness the mirror neurons to make decisions quickly. And the situations we have at hand are the kind of situations that require quick decisions. So if we develop this kind of technology, it will help, quicken it, so that
Mhm.
people can really feel really that. It's something that we're working on, and I think it's really going to be great.
That's that technological solution you think every problem can have. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So, Osanakachi, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for having me, and I thank my friend Ugochukwu for uh, that wonderful work. I happens to be one of the sensitivity editor of the work. It was a very deep, thoughtful theme that you put out there to help us to learn the art of thinking properly. There is a difference between critical thinking and an exercise in clear thinking. So he tried to put up something, he with backing it up with stories, and that is so pragmatic enough for us to understand his points. So, but when you look at the aspect where he talked about fear, we often discuss it, and now he talked about fear as cognitive illusion. So I've been trying to that, look at a conceptual clarification of uh, the meaning of fear as a cognitive illusion. I would like him to throw more light as we discuss a bit about fear with regards to clear thinking.
Okay, thank you so much, Olsen Akachi. It's really great to have you on board. And so, talking about fear as a cognitive illusion, I'm just going to break down the terms. Cognitive is really about the mind and its capabilities, and the illusion is about a false perception of reality. That's what illusion is: false perception of reality. And so, what really triggers fear when you confront a reality, some of the fears that we confront, we have, is because when we confront that reality, when we are getting the data that is coming from reality, it is such that we have not really understood, we have not really accurately interpreted that information to understand the components, like we talked about sufficient intelligence about the problem, to understand the full ramifications of that problem and what it entails. Once you can define anything, anything that you can define, you can modify, and anything that you cannot define overwhelms you. So once you enter into a situation that you cannot define a reality, your brain enters into that state of a freeze, flight, and mode, so that it is trying to, it releases adrenaline, releases cortisol to really get you to maybe flee from the situation because you cannot explain it, because you cannot make sense of it. But if you could make sense of it, if you had a better interpretation of that reality, if you had a better understanding of what are the ramifications and the components of what the data that was coming, then you will not find yourself in that cognitive impasse. You will not find yourself in a false perception of the information. So once you have the right perception of the information, then you are better equipped to find a way to solve it. Like we talked about, that any problem that we can deploy a sufficient solution to it, the technology, which is the solution and the technology is usually within that problem. And so if we understand that, a good example is when the coronavirus started, we were afraid. There was a whole lot of messages out there. It comes through coughing, it comes through breathing, it's airborne, it's not airborne, and a lot of people entered into that frenzy. I myself find myself in that situation. I've been walking around the streets, and I had this compulsive disorder of anything I touched, I would like to wash my hand. So it got to a point that the thing was really getting to my mind, and it was driving me crazy. So I saw myself, you really have to get down to study this coronavirus to understand how it impacts. And I went to deep study. I started studying scientific papers. I started looking at the researches on all of it. And what I found out that the human body has the capacity to solve 90% of every disease that you can encounter. And when you talk about viruses and bacteria and all of these things, our immune system has been built, has evolved billions and millions of years ago. The multicellular organism, because we are multicellular organism, the cellular structure of our bodies have been built in such a way that it's almost foolproof to diseases and our viruses out there. The only difference in the case of coronavirus was it is because it is a novel kind of virus. And so when I started studying deeper, and I started understanding that people with regards to your immune system, how healthy your immune system is, you could fight off this disease. So I started to understand that it was really more about my fear about coronavirus was much dangerous than the virus in itself. So the virus in itself, the message of the virus sent out memes. So memes are social, cultural ideologies, not about things that people send out there. So the memes of the virus was more powerful and was causing fear within the body and within people's minds. And once you're in a state of fear, your body releases cortisol, the stress hormone, and it shuts down your immune system. You enter into fight or flight mode, and your body shuts off blood and puts it at your hands and your limbs and all of that, getting you ready for action. And then your reproductive system begins to shut down, so that even before the coronavirus comes, your immune system, the bacteria and viruses that are already in your immune system could kill you off before the coronavirus even arrives. So when I understand this, when I understood how these things work, it helps to relieve a lot of the fear I had around the virus and all of that. I was still practicing the self-practices around, like putting up marks and all of that. But it saved me a lot of cognitive space. It saved me a lot of the wrong perception I had about it. And to a large extent, it helped me in managing this. So this is my own interpretation or understanding of how fear can really cripple us on our minds in making sense of what is happening in the world and making better decisions and in problem solving.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Ugochukwu. And
So,
Osunakachi,
yeah,
go ahead.
I wanted to react to what he just explained. You know, just explaining fear from the cognitive viewpoint of it makes could lead to a kind of a bit of what they call it, wrong ethical understanding of what fear really is. So, you talk about cognitive bias, and when you look at the ontological foundation of fear and how it works, of which you know that our minds, before reacting towards anything, before having an interpretation, there is a process of perception, impression, and reaction. And as the subject of fear, for you to really understand uh, your fear, you need to know your fear factors and objects of fear. So now, the impression that gives you determines how you approach your fear. Now, when there is an impression, there is nothing like illusion or false impression, like most people, motivational speakers will say, is false evidence appearing real. So I look at these things and I laugh. You are seeing something that is telling you that if you enter this highway, this car will kill you, and you say it's a false evidence. So you just reduce the whole ramification of fear, calling it false evidence appearing real. Fear is both a good, and I've explained this thing with the number, that is both a good and bad emotion, depending on how the mind translates it. Because when you hear sound of, or the sound of a gunshot, or when there is an earthquake, it creates an impression in your mind. So because you've perceived it, now it depends on you to know how you approach those things. Now, there should be a very good understanding of the logic of fear, where we talk about the FF plus OF equals to SF. That is fear factors plus objects of fear equals to the subject of fear. So this is how these things work. So when you just say it is kind of a cognitive illusion, it means that some of the consciousness that fear brings to us as a species, they are elusive, sorry. They are elusive. So we need to appreciate the place of fear and our existential struggle as a species. We need to really know that it is not all about illusion or whatever. It all depends on how. That's why in one of in our theories as fearism thinker, we talk about a better fear management education. We talk about um, understanding, having a good knowledge. So I was so happy when he was talking about understanding what you fear, those things that create tension, you know. So, and another thing that I wanted to add is we now have F4, but most people, there's a lot of the philosophy going on. So the philosophy, the construction and reconstruction. So when you talk about just the F3, that is freeze, flight, and the fight, you forget about the fearless. So these things are important in interpretation and understanding of our objects of fear and fear. So thank you so much for the wonderful work you've been out there. So, we move.
Yes, thank you, Osunakachi, for your remarks. And of course, you are a theorist of fearism. And it is noteworthy, fear is not bad per se. It's not inherently an undesirable emotion. What is desirable is to align any sort of emotion with one's objective needs and well-being. So if fear serves a useful purpose, then it is good to have. There are circumstances, however, where fear can be misaligned with the needs and objective well-being of a human in reality. Now we go to Brent Elman, who has another question for Ugochukwu.
Hey everyone, Ugo. Yeah, my notion actually it comes perfectly timed after what OC was just speaking about with relevance to fear. A idea that I once came to years ago was this concept that of perceiving fear as love in disguise, understanding that fear causes people to behave in irrational ways, and if I judge people by their irrationality, it's not very helpful for anything. But so something that for me that I've come to strive to do is to perceive that irrational response to fear as being a response to love, and that the fear that they have is related to the fact that they love something that they're afraid of not having anymore, or there's something that they have that they want, that they love this notion of, and they're afraid of something preventing them from getting it. And so my question that I was going to pose is the fact that we talk about these cognitive biases, and an example that Ugo brought up was the idea of climate change and using virtual reality to help somebody understand the depth of how big of a threat this might be. But my thought when I heard about that initially, when I heard that idea, was the fact that there are some people that are just so decided upon misunderstanding that issue. They're just so convinced that any information that's pointing to human-induced climate change is fabricated and is made of lies. And so, and that's just one example where there are these cognitive biases that just cause this conversation to just not even be capable of happening. And so we were talking. He was talking earlier. You were talking, Ugochukwu, about the idea that during World War II, maybe a nuclear bomb wasn't the best possibility, and that there could have been another way. But there were just clearly these ideological differences and biases that made that seemingly impossible. And so my question is, what are some tools to really be able to help overcome some of these biases? And it's not just the bias towards a specific topic, but a bias towards the people who are representing the topic or that side of the topic. Because it's, a lot of times you'll see these deep rooted issues where people come to think of people who have certain perspectives as being lesser human, or something along those lines, where it's not even the ideas that they have, but it's the fact that this person now personifies this idea that the combatant in this conversation has of them prior to engaging, because of these biases they have towards why someone might come to such a conclusion in the first place. And how do you get to that point to help encourage people to realize that they're the one creating these biases, and that it's not that these people are all crazy, but that we're not really figuring out why these people have, how do you overcome these differences?
All right. Thanks, Brent. Interesting question there. The question you asked actually boils down to the last rule in the book, which is about truth telling. I emphasized upon that, and people's ability to really tell themselves the truth. And when I talk about truth telling, it's really not necessarily about being honest to another person. It's more about being able to perceive reality from the first point of where, as it presents itself to you, and as it is relevant to your survival and to your thriving. Being able to perceive reality as it presents itself to you, and as it is relevant to your survival and your progress. So the reason for this is when people find themselves in a situation whereby they tell themselves a false truth, not a false truth. There's no such thing as false truth. They tell themselves, they try to convince themselves that a reality is actually not the way it is. And so when they try to do that and do it more often than not, it gets to the point that their brain adapts and believes in that reality, that it is actually the way it is. So take, for example, someone who is against all the scientific facts. It's arguing about climate change, or is arguing about, let's say, the existence of coronavirus against all the scientific facts. The reason for this is because there are a lot of issues that come into question when we talk about some of these issues. So when somebody rejects the notion of a climate change, we usually think that the problem is because of the climate change in itself. Most times it's not really about climate change. It could be the consequence of another issue, personal issue in their own lives that points to this thing, that climate change represents a picture of some other issue in their life. And so because it's really about the neural networks in our brain and how they function and how they perceive reality, how they interpret data. So if someone has an issue about, let's say, abuse at a very young age, they suffered some kind of a mental or emotional abuse from someone that they perceived as to be a leader, you will find out that when they grow up, they would find leadership positions repulsive. They'll find leaders repulsive. And so when they grow up and they start acting in ways that are antagonistic to leaders or people in leadership position, you will think it is about the leader that they are actually fighting at the moment. But actually, it is not about that present leader. It's about a cognitive bias, a problem that they actually have within them that's been haunting them for years. And that's why it's important to do an exercise in clear thinking to help people really get down to these questions. I talk about intelligent questioning as one of the ways to really help people drill down to the most basic issue that is affecting the problem that they're facing. So you might see someone that is really against climate change, and you think it's really about the climate change. It's really usually really about something much deeper that needs to be solved within that person to get that person to the point that the person can really understand the full ramifications of what is being talked about. And I used to tell people, one of the best ways to convince someone of something, you don't try to convince somebody of anything by trying to talk somebody out of what that person behaved himself into. You can't do that. What you do is you show them a different reality. Once you show somebody a different reality, they will come to the point that they will accept it as true, because the brain in itself sees reality and adapts to it as it presents itself. Once it sees that the situation that is presented at hand enables for its survival and progress, it won't dispute it. So instead of trying to talk people, the problem we are having is that we're trying to do a lot of intellectualism here. We're trying to try to convince people to talk to them, say there's coronavirus, there's climate change. You have to believe it. You have to look at all this science, look at all this data we have, look at all the statistics, listen to it. It's not that way. Show them a different reality from the one that is in their head. Because most times, what is happening in the head, the game that is being played in our head is like a maze game. You think you understand what is happening. You think you are in charge of what is happening. But actually, you're the easiest to be deceived. When actually, you do not understand it. So what I tell people is, do not try to convince people of something, especially when it is something that they behave themselves into, especially when it's an ideological or something that is very deep in their core, in the core of their humanity, in the core of their personality, and their psychology. Show them a different reality, and they will change. So that is where I got all the concepts of using virtual reality, deploying technology to do that. You can also do that physically, not necessarily to technology. We've seen cases where someone who doesn't believe in a particular thing, let's say someone who doesn't believe in the horrors of war, was put in a situation whereby he witnessed a car accident and suddenly he believes on how tragic some of these things are. And suddenly that person becomes an activist. Someone who doesn't believe in the art of terrorism, on what has happened, who believes that we should use terrorism to attack the world. And then he suffers that in that reality, that question, he suffers it on his own. Someone perpetrates that on him, on his family, and all of a sudden, the person becomes an activist. So don't try to convince people. Show them a different reality. They'll fall in place.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, great answer. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because, for instance, yesterday I was getting into my car, and as I was like, I had my mask on still. I was like getting in with groceries, and I like sat down and I was about to take my mask off, and I'm like turning on the car, and I look out the window, and there's this guy sitting at the red light, and he's looking at me, and he just flips me the bird for no reason. But I figured it was because I was wearing like a mask or something, I wasn't driving or anything. I was just literally getting in my car. And it was just like, how do you get to those people? But exactly, like you said, you're not trying to, convince them. But it really points to the fact, what I really interpreted from what you were saying too, is the acute issue that, the mental problems that exist in society, because there really are some major anti-authoritarian and, to a degree, I think the anti-authoritarian sentiment is helpful, but I think that that is a fine point about the trauma and how it can make it really tough to have these types of conversations. Thanks.
Yeah. If that guy had suffered from coronavirus and survived it, I think his attitude would have probably been different. You bet.
Yeah, I would think so. Absolutely.
There is an astute summary by Super Fin Guy of some of the comments that Ugochukwu made. He writes, "Don't explicate, demonstrate," as a more effective tool of persuasion, of getting people to see the truth of a particular matter.
Exactly. I think that captures that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So now let us go on to Art Ramon Garcia. Art Ramon, do you have any questions for Ugochukwu?
Yes, you mentioned cognitive overload, causing a lot of attention deficit in society today. And what sort of coping mechanisms can you recommend? I myself have done a lot of unplugging. I go out and hike, but it has its limits. So what do you suggest as far as dealing with cognitive overload and attention deficit?
Okay. So there are a lot of resources out there. There are a lot of solutions that have been profiled out there. And part of the things that I use for myself, it's I try to use meditation, to really get myself to unwind from the whole information that is out there, and to really focus on the most important thing. And all of these things about cognitive overload, it really boils down to majority of them comes from our social media space and the media, and how they're really affecting us. We're taking more information that as opposed to what we are supposed to be taking. And so really understanding how we can manage our attention, because our attention is like a spotlight. Wherever it goes, energy flows. Wherever it goes, focus goes. And so if you learn how to manage the attention, if you learn how to practice concentration, often we are told to learn how to concentrate. We are told to concentrate, but nobody actually teaches us how to concentrate. It's very interesting. We hardly get to schools where we are taught the art of concentration, the art of paying attention. It is a skill, it has to be learned. So I believe that anything that you have, any problem that you have, you learn yourself into it. And you can, in the same way, learn yourself out of it. You behaved yourself into a problem, you can also behave yourself out of it. And so if you're suffering from attention deficit disorder, as they would call it, you don't tell yourself that I am beholden to this, or I am, this is my lot. You can still learn your way out of it. You have to be practiced. You have to practice these, you have to practice how to use how to deploy your attention. In the past, it wasn't an issue because we didn't have all of these technologies, all of these data. out there and really fighting us and really affecting our minds. But today, it has now become requisite. It has now become important that we need to now learn. We need to practice attention management. We need to practice it. We need to put in mechanisms. We need to put in things in our social media, notifications, all of this. We need to practice. We need to put in structures to help us save ourselves from ourselves. So I don't know if other panelists have got any other suggestions, but I think in the same way, if you are suffering from attention issues, you find it difficult, it means that you learned how to get distracted. It is a skill, you learn it. You learn how to get distracted. And so if you want to get out of it, you still learn how to not get distracted. And it's a skill that I myself have been practicing, put a lot of things, structures in place, my social media, my accounts, my internet, the way I read, how I consume information. There are a lot of resources out there. Sometimes we think we need to consume every information that comes our way. Not every information is relevant to you. Information is only relevant to you at the point you need it. So consuming too much of information and thinking that the time when you need it, so that in future you would actually need it, then you put it off. It doesn't work that way. So you really need to learn how to deploy that. Another thing you need to learn is how to manage your memory. How to manage your memory, because all of this information are stored in your memory. So if you learn how to manage your memory system, I've got a course where I teach people the wealth of their memory. If you learn how to manage the wealth of your memory, if you understand that your memory can be deployed in problem solving, is one of the greatest assets that you've got. If you learn how to manage it, you can learn how to tap into it to solve problems. And so you not necessarily need to consume all the whole information. Too much of information leads to scarcity of wisdom. Too much of information leads to scarcity of wisdom. And that is what we're suffering today. We have this whole gamut of information flowing in, out every time. But we have less our decision making, the decisions we make, the way we'll choose our leaders, the way we set up our companies. All of these things show that there is less wisdom in the place. So I think you need to start practicing attention management. You need to start deploying. There are a lot of resources and tools out there. You don't need to practice all of them. Get one, practice it. By doing one, but just stay on one. Because if you're trying to stay on so many of them, you're also distracting yourself. You're also finding difficulty. So get one and use the principle of compound effect. By focusing on one at a time. Don't try to do 1 hour meditation. Start from 15 minutes, start from 5 minutes, and then build it gradually until you learn yourself out of what you've learned yourself into. So I hope that does justice to what you've asked.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ugochukwu and Art Ramon. Now let us go to Pavel Ilan. Pavel, what are your questions or comments for Ugochukwu?
Well, first, when Ugochukwu was talking about how overcoming
Pavel, I believe you're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, I'm so sorry. The first, it struck me when Ugochukwu was talking about fear of public speaking, and I'm glad that I was using the same methodology of overcoming the fear by facing it. Like I was playing the theater to overcome the fear, and the knowledge is really liberating. When I was standing in front of the 100+ people, and I knew what to do, and this feeling liberates you from the fear. And I usually explain transhumanism as ethics of use of technology. We advocate for overcoming limitations and enhancing abilities. And you did talk about that ethical problems during development of the nuclear technologies. And my question is, how can we use clear thinking to develop ethics of use technology and to implement this ethics, especially in such a crisis context like COVID-19 pandemic, when for example, like Gennady was emphasizing his last essays about the price of inaction. Like the ethics we have now in place is said that it's better to play safe and lose countless lives than try and take a risk. So how can we develop and implement this kind of ethics, which allow us to be more proactive and active and effective?
Okay. Okay, so if I got you correctly, you're asking about how we can really develop the kind of ethics that allows us to be more proactive and in our confrontation of problems, and that will also allow us to be more humane at the same time. Is that correct?
Yeah. How can we be more proactive about solving the problems through technology, and how can we use technology to improve condition of human existence?
Okay. Okay, that's right. Okay, so in the book I talked about the use of ethics in analyzing, and that's the third rule in the book. In analyzing issues of right or wrong, good or bad, use ethics, natural ethics, as against moral rules. And I differentiated between ethics and moral rules, especially natural ethics and moral rules. Rules, I define ethics as rules that are derived naturally from reality, from nature itself. And so when you're talking about ethical notions, ethical norms or rules, they are rules that come from nature itself. And so they are indisputable. They are in and of themselves proved to be right, undisputable. If you disobey them, you suffer for it. Those ones are factual. You cannot disprove of them. So they are the very rules they are the rule books of your biology. They are the rule books of your genes. They are the rule books of life itself. So I say, on the other hand, morality is about people's understanding and people's perception of how they should conduct their affairs in the world based on their current understanding of the world. And so that is why if you see moral rules in one religion is different from the other. So the Christians, their morality is quite different from the Muslims. The morality in of the American is different from the Russian. They see that in the kind of views they share, democracy as against capitalism. So you see that. So the moralities of the Democrats is a little bit different from the Republican. So what constitutes that? So if you look at morality in itself, you will find out that it is subject to the limitation of human understanding, because it is people's understanding of how the world works for them now, how they understand the world, not actually how the world works, but how they understand the world. In the United States, being a gay is no problem. It is not against the law. But in my country, Nigeria, it is against the law. So who determines which is actually the right or the wrong one? So all of these issues, they are moral issues because they are based on people's understanding of the world currently. So I tell people, if you want to make a decision that is very critical, especially the decisions that are on the border of life and death, the decisions that have a very vast implication, very far-reaching implications, like the coronavirus that we have, you will be shooting yourself on the foot if you are basing your decisions on moral rules, because we are in a global world. So if you base your decision as an American and you say to hell with the Russian, to hell with the Chinese, to hell with the African, you are not driving an inclusive humanity, and you're not driving a collaborative effort into solving problems. Because what coronavirus has really exposed to us is that most of the issues that we face currently are global issues and not national issues. So if you want to solve the problem of coronavirus and you say it's in your country, That's not going to work, because someone is going to still carry the virus and enter your country. So you better start solve it at the global level so that it doesn't affect you at the local level. So the better, and for you to really address that at the global level, you need to learn how to think like a globalist. Not in the sense of trying to learn how to think from natural ethics. Does it cause pain for the other person? How does it affect life in itself? How does it affect the growth of life in itself? Not how does it help my GDP to grow this year? How does it add to the economic benefits of my country? How does it help our stocks to grow? Because what is success for you in your company could be failure to another person. And those consequences could boomerang in the long run or in the short run. Now, if you understand how to utilize this rule, how to base your actions based on these moral or on these ethics, not on moral rules, especially when it comes to very high sensitive issues, then you can properly deploy the rule where I talked about having a bias towards action. You would understand when you're not judging an issue, when you're not judging a problem that you want to solve, you look at the demands of the solution that you're putting in place. If you have a sufficient solution to that, then it is easier for you to work based on quick action because you're working from a natural perspective. You know that you're not disobeying the laws of nature. And you know that anything that is in consonance with the laws of nature will ultimately prevail. It wouldn't go haywire as far as it is in consonance with the law of nature. So you'll be rest assured that no matter what happens, nature has got my back covered. So I don't know if I did justice to that, but I think that's my response there.
Yes, thank you for your response, Ugochukwu. And now let's see if David Shoemaker has a question or a comment.
Yes, thank you. This discussion today has been quite good, and there's been quite a lot to think about. I greatly appreciate having discussions like this. Any question that I have, though, goes back to talking about, made some notes here, goes back to talking about polar thinking. So, you know, we've mentioned Democrats and Republicans and others, but while I appreciate the differences that are between them, I wonder if it doesn't go to something maybe even more basic, back to physiological. It takes more energy to get into the nuances of particular issues. And in this country, the 30-second soundbite, something quick, gets put out there. Something emotional, something with an emotional hook gets out there. And people will make decisions based on that, not wanting to spend the additional energy perhaps that it takes. And I don't mean lazy. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's a physical fact that it takes more energy to delve into the issues. And going back to what we were talking about with so much information being put out there from so many different sources, and that I see expanding at an exponential rate. Are there things technology-wise that we can do to help? I think Tom was talking about, being able to use AI to our advantage. So I get that, but I was just wondering if you might have some other thoughts, some things that we can do to take some concrete action to try to make it fashionable, if you will, to want to get past that 30-second soundbite or just the quick emotional hook.
Okay. So you're talking mainly about very impulsive statements or impulsive things that really drive the impulsive instincts within us. So let's say the president tweets about something and, and then people really get aggravated. They say, oh, why shouldn't do that and all of that. And I think that boils down to these things have always been there for us. That reaction that you gave out about the tweet or about the video that you saw, it has always been the way that you would react. It has always been the way that humans beings react to those issues. But the only thing that was in the past, you didn't have the option to see every of the president's actions. We didn't have the option to see everything that everybody out there was saying. And so it saved us, it gave us a little bit of sanity. It's maintained our sanity to a certain extent. But it doesn't mean that we wouldn't have responded if we are exposed to those issues. But what technology has done is that it has exposed us to all of these issues so that you could see everything that happened. And so it would trigger that impulsive response within you just in a snap of a finger. So whether those issues will be out there, the question is, they will be out there. Your neighbor will try to get you angered. He will act in a stupid way. He would act in a way that you would deem irrational. There's nothing you can do about it. You cannot control what is happening outside. The only thing you can control is how you react to it. Those are what you can control, how you react to what is coming. And so that boils down to interpretation. That boils down to your understanding of these issues. How do you interpret this world? How do you interpret these issues? And it also boils down to what level of exposure are you giving yourself? Are you allowing yourself to have with these issues that are on this? I, for one, in my country, listening to the national news is like going through, I don't know how to explain it. You really have to suspend common sense to sit down and listen to a national news of 15 minutes without going, oh my God, are these human beings? Are human beings actually doing this? You have to suspend your common sense for you to do that. And so one of the ways I found in allowing myself to save myself from these issues, I do not listen to everyday news. That's all of these things are happening. I try as much as possible. I rarely visit Twitter. Because Twitter is a platform for gossip. If you understand how social media has evolved, you'll find out that Twitter harnesses the gossip instinct within us. And so we are always preferring on this latest information, what is happening now. And so that is where the worst instincts in us are revealed. You want to tweet out what is happening now. It doesn't give you the room to have a reflective thinking and think through an issue before you can pass on judgments from it. So if I want to listen to news, if I want to find out what is happening in the country, I would wait until that issue is over, and then I will go and read analyzed articles by experts on that issue. That is when I can get a much educated reflection on that problem. So let's say the problem of coronavirus, instead of following the day-to-day news that is happening and how everybody is reacting to it, I wait and get a synthesized report from McKinsey report and a synthesized report from economists. I'm not saying a particular newspaper has the whole body of truth. That's not what I'm saying. But I get a more synthesized report from a more intelligent analysis. That helps me to make sense of what is happening. And that also helps to save my sanity. So saving yourself from saving yourself from being exposed to all of these issues, you don't need to find out what is happening every day. Even if you don't listen to the news for 1 week, the world is not going to end. If the world wants to end, you're going to know. You're going to know before the world ends, you will know. When coronavirus started, without listening to the news, your neighbor will tell you. So find a way to save yourself all of these things. Sometimes you don't need to listen to the news. Ask your neighbor, what's happening in the news today? Once the person starts telling you about the news, and at the point you discover that there is no meaningful thing for you there, just stop the person and continue your day. Allow people to do the interpretation for you. Allow them to do the analysis for you, the synthesis for you. When an issue is very important that you will know about it, you will know about it. But exposing yourself to the day-to-day news, I think is a very horrible thing to do to your brain.
Yes, thank you for that insightful response, Ugochukwu. And it's interesting, you're correct that social media hasn't really created any new tendencies of human behavior, but it has exposed us more directly to those tendencies that were already present. It's just that we had certain filters, certain layers of separation in the past. And in part because of the novelty of social media technology, we haven't developed yet the proper protocols and habits to have those filters operating in our favor again in the social media world. And of course, we don't want to lose the benefits of potentially connecting with anyone in the world and sharing ideas and discovering new insights about how people actually are. But on the other hand, we as individuals always should have control and should be able to take in that information on our own terms. And I think that's the challenge a lot of people are grappling with in this era of social media, because there is what I characterize as the expectation of instantaneous response. And social media architectures are very much designed to cultivate that. So hence all of the push messages that I try to turn off, by the way, all of the attempts by so many people to get one to instantaneously engage with them on anything. Whereas in prior eras, with letters, with emails, with more long form methods of correspondence, they were more deliberative in nature. People could easily take a few hours or a few days to formulate a well-reasoned response, and they could devote specific periods of time in their day to this kind of correspondence. Likewise with news, there used to be newspapers that aggregated information, and people would have rituals, habits where they would read the newspaper at a particular time of day or at a particular time of week, and that would be their regular dose of the news. Now, some might say some of their information might have been curated or distorted by entities that didn't necessarily have their interests in mind, but the cognitive load was a lot more reasonable at that time, and people didn't experience this scattered feeling, this feeling like they didn't have enough time to attend to that. But what do you think are some ways to recreate that set of filters that would be useful to keep people from this overload of information and the expectation of instantaneous response, while still harnessing all of the benefits of technology, while still getting the ability to have an objective, unfiltered view of events when that is what one desires as something that could benefit oneself and one's understanding of the world?
All right, thank you so much for that question. What I would say to that is I've not had much of a time to really process that. But what I would say to that is if we looked at the way we did it in the past, if we looked at some of the ways that some of the filters that we had in the past, so some of them were filters that came from distance, some of them were filters that came from location, from lack of technology and all of those things. We can really, the technology we have today is still novel. To, in some instance, to a large extent, is still novel. And still, we're just trying to figure out how to really interface with it. We're still trying to figure out how to work with it. And some technology companies are trying to test out what works. So you see iPhone putting on the sleep mode and the screen saver that allows you to turn off and puts in certain colors that will allow you to not be easily quick to check out notifications and all of that. It also shows you your screen time and all of that. So these are possibilities. These are things that we need to be iteratively testing out. There is no one or be all quick answer to it that we will say this is what we need to do now. What I would say to that is we need to keep testing out some of these options that we've got, and we need to start being innovative about them. Trying not to test out how these things can work for us. Another good way to take care of this, one that I've reflected on my own, and one that I've been looking towards to build a technology around it, like more of an app and an AI system around it. So I've been doing some research and I'm working on this to see how possible it is to create a social media aggregator. So what I call a social media aggregator. So that social media aggregating system allows you to aggregate your Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of your social media into one account, into one dashboard, so that you can see everything in real time. And you can track the events of what is happening, the reactions on all of them. You can track it in real time and you can see the values on all of these things. And you can equally track your digital footprint, what is happening across your activities across the whole social media, and see the benefits in real time on these people. So we will have a system that ranks your comments, that ranks your solutions, your videos that you have put out there. We'll have a system that ranks it based on the benefits it has on people. So based on people's review, also, let's say you put out a video there and people say, oh, this video has helped me so much. It helped me solve this and this problem. So that system will rank it based on that value. And so at the end, we'll have an aggregating value evaluation of all the content you have been putting out online. And we can say your value on social media is worth so and so. And its equivalent in cash is so and so. I don't know. So you get a picture I'm trying to paint there. So that allows you to know how valuable the information you're putting out there is, on the one hand. And people can also engage you based on that. They'll say, okay, this guy is very useful on social media. Look at the kind of content he's putting out there. Look at the reviews he's having there. So people can see all of that in real time: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of them put in one place for you to really see what is happening. And then the final, I think, will be really powerful and will be really powerful in solving this problem, is to create what I call your digital avatar. A digital avatar that is composed of all of the information that you have been putting out online over time, your digital footprint. Compose all of them together and build an AI system that behaves like you, so that when you are offline, that AI system can go respond to messages, interact with people, and save you that cognitive space. It only calls you into question when you have an important message to respond to. So let's say there is a meeting that doesn't necessarily require your presence. It can go attend that and it can give you feedback on what it's got. So these can really serve in a great way to saving you from that constant interface and coming out, and to also allow you to be much more creative. Because when you have these excessive sensory stimulus, excessive sensory stimulus, that information is always stimulating your brain, it gets to the point that you now become hyperactive about this information and you become less creative. So to be really creative, people in the past, we have seen that the scientists, the inventors, they really enjoyed solitary moments. For you to be really creative, for you to invent, you have to create that solitary space for you to really go down within yourself and harness the creative capabilities within you. So these are the solutions that I've been working on. And hopefully I've been looking out for collaborations out there for people who have interesting talents. So that we can really join forces together to build solutions to some of the problems that we're witnessing in our world today. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, thank you, Ugochukwu. And the social media aggregator is an excellent idea. I have entertained the notion within my own mind as well. What if there could be a platform which takes in all of the messages, all of the stimuli essentially that come in from the various social networks, and many of us participate on 5 to 10 different platforms these days. And what if one could get everything that one needs to address on each of these platforms in the same place, so that one doesn't have to keep checking notifications, keep switching platforms, keep posting the same thing over and over again on multiple systems, which is a very time-consuming process after one reaches a web presence in a lot of various places. Brent, interestingly, points out in our internal chat, there's an application called Clout that does some of this, and Brent, it does still exist. Brent says it gives you a social media score based on your reach, influence, and engagement. I don't think it does the aggregation of content in the same way, though. Ugochukwu, what you propose is more comprehensive, essentially a combined social media profile coupled with an AI, a highly intelligent chatbot that is able to synthesize all of one's ideas and provide responses to people. For instance, if one has published a given paper on a subject and people ask one a question that was addressed in that paper, perhaps that chatbot could pick out excerpts from the paper that are relevant. Of course, then there really has to be great care taken to make sure the chatbot is accurate and that it only discloses what one wants disclosed. So if one made a particular post that is private or for friends only, and a member of the public asks one a question, one wouldn't want the AI to pick content from that friends only post and put it out there to a broader audience. So it would have to be quite sophisticated, perhaps more sophisticated than the language GPT-3 is today, although GPT-3 can form very coherent sentences and narratives. Sometimes it still lacks an understanding of the content that it is formulating these phrases about. But I could definitely see in the future this being part of the solution. And in the meantime, indeed, people need to think for themselves about how to reinstitute some of these more systematic regimens of receiving and processing information to create time for solitary work and reflection and creativity, because you're absolutely correct. People cannot create their best work if they're constantly in this stream of externally provided information, if they're constantly having to react to it rather than bring something of their own to the world. So thank you very much for your answer. And I understand it is now past midnight in Nigeria. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to provide some closing comments. Ugochukwu, how would you like to sum up the conversation today? And also for those who are interested in learning more about your thinking, where can people find out more about you? Ugochukwu, I believe you're on mute. Oh, can you unmute yourself, or is that not a possibility? No, that's strange. David, could you unmute Ugochukwu, please? Huh. I am not sure what's happening.
I'm not sure either. I can't get him to unmute as well. Give me another second.
Okay.
Well, in the meantime, as far as a comment, somebody posted the other day, I'll jump off as soon as he unmutes, but somebody posted something about, would our childhoods be worse if we had social media growing up in the 70s and 80s? And I think if we did, that childhoods today would be better, because we would have worked through a lot of these processes by now. So I think there is a trend towards things working themselves out, things getting better. Us, the early adoption of this social media and the novelty of it has worked against us. But I think over that period of time, we would have made childhoods better today, at least in relation to social media.
Yes, indeed. It seems that many of us early adopters have to work through the bugs of a given system or a given mode of interaction so that it gets improved for the next generation. And I do hope that over time, social media will become more refined and people culturally will develop these protocols for dealing with it effectively.
Okay.
So Ugochukwu, you are back now. It seems that
Yeah.
you are unmuted, so let us hear your closing comments.
Yeah, thank you so much. I had a bit of an issue. The application started hanging, so I had to do that. So thank you so much. It's been great. It's been a very long and I've not had any discussion this long and very deep into some of the questions and issues surrounding the book and exercising clear thinking. Writing the book was really more of a personal thing for me. It was me trying to find how do I keep myself straight, even as I propose solutions and try a way to provide value to people out there, so that I don't think I'm doing good in the without knowing that I'm actually doing harm there. And that is what I think every leader, every decision maker and problem solver out there, an important question that they should ask themselves as they continue to provide value to the world. So I have programs and I run courses for people on some of the issues around decision making and problem solving in businesses, in corporate organizations, and all of that. I'm also open to people who really want some kind of consultation on major issues about their life and how they can come to decisions about some of the problems they're facing. So this is what I've developed in my life to doing, and so I am open to any of these from the audience or from anybody who has issues or trying to make sense of what he or she has found himself into. Nobody has all the answers. Nobody has all the answers. So we keep profiling solutions and we keep looking at these issues from our own diverse perspectives so that we can get a sufficient intelligence, a sufficient understanding of what is really out there. So I'm open to conversation, I'm open to consultation, I'm open to working with any of you out there who are really interesting and very fascinating minds. So I'm a great supporter, and I myself also am a transhumanist. Started studying that about by around 2017 after reading the works of Yuval Noah Harari, Homo Deus and Sapiens, and 21st century, 21 questions for 21st century, and after reading the books of also Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil. And I figure you've interviewed him before. I've seen your interview with him.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so those are some interesting ideas. So those things got me thinking about emerging technologies and how we can grapple with all of these issues. So thank you so much for having me, and look forward to engaging with you people in different projects and other ways. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Ugochukwu, for joining us today. It was an excellent conversation and exactly the kind of thoughtful, philosophical, practical, transdisciplinary conversation that we seek to foster in our virtual enlightenment salons. And next Sunday, December 27th at 1 p.m. Pacific time, our guest will be another transhumanist philosopher, Francesco Neo Amati, who runs the Facebook group Transhumanism, the Future of Humanity. So we look forward to a thought-provoking conversation with him as well. I would also like to remind our viewers that the US Transhumanist Party has an ongoing exposure period on its proposed constitutional reforms, which were developed as a consequence of the Reform Summit that took place on November 28th and 29th. I posted a link in the YouTube chat, so please go and look at the proposals and offer your comments on the US Transhumanist Party website. We always encourage participation by our members. We have a very active, vibrant audience for the virtual enlightenment salons, and they have made excellent comments in the YouTube chat today as well. So there are plenty of exciting developments and great conversations to come. And until then, live long, and prosper.